Now, as we've been saying through the show, Boris Johnson, as you've heard, has been criticised by environmentalists for saying that recycling plastic just doesn't work.
Well, answering children's questions ahead of the COP26 climate summit, the Prime Minister said that we should reduce the amount of plastic we actually use rather than focusing on recycling. He's sort of got a point. Let's listen.
All right,
it's the red herring bit, isn't it?
Yes, I think that's really what drew the flack. Joining us now is the environmental scientist, Angela Terry. She thinks that Boris's comments are very unhelpful and that recycling, she says, obviously does help. And environmental campaigner Natalie Fay, who says that 40 to 50% of our plastic is actually secretly incinerated and that our entire recycling system, again, secretly, is broken into bits. So we'll start with you. You kind of think that, broadly speaking, although he sort of did it in the classic Boris, bumble speak, you think he's made a good point?
I do. I mean, I think really he is absolutely right to highlight the fact that our recycling system here in the UK currently is broken and that we need to be focusing on reducing the crazy amount of plastic that we currently produce. So outside, just to put it in context, outside of the US, the UK produces more plastic waste per person than any other country in the world. Okay, so we are one of the biggest plastic waste creators in the world, and we don't currently have a recycling system that's fit for purpose. So let me just talk you through that a bit. It's basically more than half of what the government says that we are recycling. So the plastic that we put in our recycling boxes and hopefully wash, more than half of that is being exported abroad, usually to countries like Turkey or Malaysia, where they don't have adequate recycling infrastructure, and a lot of that plastic is ending up being illegally burnt or dumped, or it's leaking into our ecosystems and rivers and seas. Okay, and that's also a human health problem for the waste pickers that are usually women in those countries that are sorting through our toxic plastic waste. What else is happening here in the UK is a lot of that plastic is actually also being diverted. So things like plastic tubs, yogurt pots, plastic trays. Again, we don't have adequate recycling facilities in the UK to process those, and those are being diverted to waste-to-energy plants. So, in fact, we're incinerating a lot of that plastic here in the UK.
Just before we let Angela Terry come back on all of that, because that was very interesting, actually, can you explain to us what he meant when he said you can't really recycle plastic more than 3 times? I didn't understand what he meant by that. Do you know what he means?
I do, yeah. So plastic isn't infinitely recyclable like glass and aluminium and metal. So basically plastic, the quality of plastic downgrades every time you recycle it. So a nice, shiny, clear plastic bottle can't ever be a nice, shiny, clear plastic bottle again. They have to put virgin plastics into it to make it durable and make it fit for purpose. So constantly plastic, each time it's recycled, is being downgraded and downgraded till at the end of it, it's really not that much use. And the other thing to remember is that plastic currently is 99% made of fossil fuels. So we need to be reducing the amount of plastic we're putting into the system, and so that we're tackling climate change as well as the environmental effects from plastic pollution.
Yeah, so Angela, there's a lot of points being made there based in fact, that can't be necessarily refuted. What is your point in saying that what he said was unhelpful? It's unhelpful, I suppose, for all of us who think we're doing the right thing and now we feel maybe we've just had our blinkers on. Yeah. We thought we were doing the right thing and maybe it was all for nothing.
Exactly. So that is the key problem of what he said. I don't disagree with the word Natalie just said. We have to reduce plastic and we have to sort out our recycling processes. And crucially, we have to have the investment so that both the plastic isn't used in the first place and the legislation, but also that if plastic has to be used, it is then part of a circular economy. So we reduce how much we have, we reuse what we can, and then we recycle. So that is essential, and no environmentalist will argue with that. The thing that was really unhelpful about Boris's comments yesterday is, firstly, it goes against government policy. So it goes against his own government policy that we need to increase the amount of household and business recycling. So it's sending a very mixed message to people out there. Secondly, the whole thing, as we run up to COP, which is the biggest climate conference in the world, is that we cannot reach net zero. We cannot stop carbon pollution without taking people on this journey with us, because we need people's behaviour to change. And the most popular climate action people can take is recycling. It's the thing that we do in our kitchens with our food waste, and it's a physical thing that people are linked to. So if they're then told that that is a rubbish waste of their time and they could have just been shoving it in the black bin all along, then we're absolutely sort of giving them a disincentive to engage in this subject.
We don't want
so
a comfort blanket, do we, as a population? We don't want to be doing things that aren't helpful. And then, in a way, what it does is it eases our moral conscience, and therefore we do drive diesel cars, or we will take long journeys, or we will keep the heating on and open the windows. So Vampire, you're making really good points. The whole thing is we have to look at where our carbon footprint comes from, and you've just named them all. It's if you've got a big SUV, that is going to be your biggest component of the carbon pollution you produce. If you haven't insulated your home, if you're constantly consuming and wasting food and other goods, if switching to renewable electricity, there's loads of high measured stuff that people can be doing. Recycling in terms of climate is a low level, but also, crucially, it helps reduce waste. So your local authority only collects your black bin every 3 weeks. It collects your recycling every week. And that's because they all have key targets for recycling, and it costs more to landfill. So if we all stop recycling tomorrow, because they've heard Boris say it doesn't count, then our local authorities will be picking up the bill for that. So will the environment.
You're both making really clear points, actually, from slightly differing sides of the argument, although there's a lot you agree on. And I suppose that's one of the helpful things that's come out of what happened yesterday, what he said. It's got people talking and thinking and reappraising everything. One thing that we weren't going to ask you, but it's sort of bubbled into the consciousness of the programme this morning, is this question of China, and China not coming to COP26 next week. I'd love to know, from your kind of semi-professional standpoints, what you think about that. How do we engage China in this debate? Natalie, what would you say on that?
Well, I think it's really important that we keep the conversation focused on plastic pollution, because right now what we're seeing is huge amounts of investment in the US, but also in China, to increase plastic production. So the fact that they're not coming to COP26 is obviously awful. But I think it's really important for us to remember that we need to focus on reducing the amount of plastic that we are producing globally. So currently, global oil use, seeing as we're talking about climate this morning, global oil use is about 5 or 6% of global oil use is used to make plastics currently. Now that's predicted to rise to 20% by 2050. It's predicted to triple plastic pollution in our oceans. So we need to keep the conversation on track and keep talking about how we can reduce plastic. So the government, and Boris needs to very much put his money where his mouth is and fix our broken recycling system. He needs to introduce more taxes and bans and levies on plastic, because we know that that reduces the amount of single-use plastic. And retailers need to introduce a lot more infrastructure and refill and reuse systems. So we need to normalise refilling in our.
And the thing, but I suppose the reason we're talking about this morning is about, well, personal responsibility, because on the one hand, we talk about how we all live our individual lives. And I think that what Boris Johnson, and I think that's what has annoyed you, Angela, is that it's sort of, from years of thinking we have to do something, it's now, again, taken the focus away from our individual responsibility. And it says, the UK, it says here, uses alone 14 billion plastic bottles a year, and only 8.3 of those plastic bottles are actually sent for recycling. It goes exactly to the point that you're making, Natalie. But I suppose the question is, if you're a busy family and you're trying to get the lunch boxes ready for your kids, or you're trying to just sort out your life, you go down the supermarket aisle. How do you avoid plastic? How can I, in my individual choices, on a daily basis, avoid plastic on You can't. So I think that's the debate, isn't it? It's like, how do we as individuals feel responsible for what we're doing when the system itself doesn't help us?
So the power of the individual consumer is much greater than anyone thinks. And you can see that in the trends. For example, electric cars are now the most popular cars in the UK, and that was despite the car industry spending only 1% advertising them of their advertising budgets. So consumer trends are what businesses and politicians listen to very carefully. If our supermarkets know that we don't want plastic, then they are starting to have plastic-free aisles. In terms of busy lives, there's several quick tips that people can do. One is there's alternatives such as beeswax wrapping that people can use instead of cling film. If you are one of these people that's buying bottled water, just stop it. The water quality from your tap is generally better than the water that you're buying at the supermarket. So it will save you money and avoid those plastic bottles. We've invested in a soda stream. We actually got it as our wedding gift.
Very 1980s.
But it saves you buying those fizzy bottles that are full of sugar, and you get to determine what you put in them. So there's all sorts of things people can do.
I like that.
And you talk about the power of the I suppose the boycott. You know, using boycotting buying plastic bottles of water. We are still getting lots of messages from our viewers who they are boycotting Chinese goods wherever they can. Wherever they can do that.
Yeah, so,
do you think
yes,
that might bring pressure to? I mean, it would have to be more than just Britain doing that. Do you think that may be kind of, I suppose, emerging people power to affect China's view? Yep.
So in terms of China, the key thing is our trade deals. So we are currently renegotiating trade deals. Now, unfortunately, our first trade deal with Australia took out any climate change, any carbon target barriers, because Australia has just announced it's going to reach net zero by 2050 today, but they haven't put a 2030 target on. So unless there's meaningful action, these faraway promises are almost pointless, basically. Okay. So the trade deals with China, with Australia, are really important to make sure they're environmentally sound.
Natalie, before we go, just a couple of points from you, quick tips of how we can, I know you talk about the system and how all those policies need to change. We know that that's what COP26 is about. But going back to whether recycling is worth it or not, what do we do? A couple of tips individually, how you live your life better?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Angela said, it's very much the trends that it's very much our people power that's driving this action in supermarkets, and we are driving those changes. So we need to keep up the pressure on our supermarkets, keep telling them what we want, keep writing to your MP. So those things actually do have a lot of power. Or support organisations like City to See, like other campaigning organisations that are doing that work day in, day out, and making sure the pressure is on our government. But also carrying a reusable bottle, downloading the refill app, trying to go plastic free as much as you can. That sends the right signals to our retailers and to our government.
Thank you both very much indeed. That was a really useful conversation. I really enjoyed that.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.